What's that?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, at 6 o'clock, I'm going to call to order the meeting of the Oregon District Board of Education. It's Monday, June 10th, 2019. We're at the Oregon School District High School Innovation Center. Could you call the roll, Ms. Heitz?
Ms. Feeney?
Present.
Ms. Oderico?
Here.
Ms. Flanagan?
Here.
Mr. Pankratz? Ms. Bijak?
Here.
Mr. LeBrun?
Here.
Mr. Zock?
Present, and Mr. Pankratz had indicated to me that he was going to be out of town this evening and asked to be excused from the meeting. I have proof that the meeting has been appropriately noticed under Wisconsin Open Meetings Law, and I have a copy of those documents with me. I'll give them to Ms. Height if anyone wants to inspect those. The agenda this evening is we're going to recess into Committee of the Whole in a minute and talk about items of policy, and Ms. Feeney will be directing us through that. The consent calendar, in terms of action items, we're going to have a report from the Parent Advisory Council. I don't anticipate we need to take any action, but we'll receive a report from them. I've told them to be here around 7 o'clock, so I think they'll be here then. We have a CISA 2 service contract, potential increases in open enrollment spaces, and then some informational items. We will be going to closed session at the conclusion of our regular meeting. Will not be returning into open session at that time. So I need a motion to approve the agenda as posted.
Steve, I just have one question, which is after we recess into the Committee of the Whole, do we come back out of that to
Correct.
perform the rest of the
Yes.
tasks on our agenda?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I will move approval of the agenda.
Mr. LeBrun with the second. Got to be a little quicker on the buzzer. It's Jeopardy 101. We've learned that in the last month and a half. So all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed. We have an approved agenda, so I'd entertain a motion to recess the regular board meeting and to convene as a committee of the whole.
So moved. Second.
All right. Any discussion? Why don't you call the roll on that?
Ms. Flanagan?
Yes.
Ms. Bijak?
Yes.
Ms. Feeney?
Yes.
Ms. Oderico?
Yes.
Mr. LeBrun?
Yes.
Mr. Zock?
Yes, okay, we're in session as a committee of the whole, and just to recap, our formal rules regarding Robert's rules are suspended. We can discuss without having a motion on the table, and the purpose is to facilitate our communication. Barb's going to lead us through the conversation tonight. She and I have talked. We're going to talk about 3 items. One is policy 411, and the other is policy 931, and then beginning the discussion on screen time. So Barb.
Okay, so I think the way we're going to proceed on this first item, the graduation requirements, is Steve is going to give us a little bit of background on how we ended up with what we've got in policy 411, and we're going to be looking specifically at 41102. And you should all have a copy of that in front of you. And then after that, we're going to have Dr. Bussler and Dr. Bergstrom just fill us in on where we're at with it and what their current thoughts are on it. And then we'll proceed to just have some general discussion.
And Courtney, jump in at any point, because you were around when we were talking about some of this stuff too as well. But the background for 411 is as follows. Before 411 had been revised, we didn't have 41102 in its current form. Those items in 41102 were part of the district exit outcomes, which were adopted by the district back in 1992, I think, or a form of them, and were a standalone document alongside the graduation requirements. When we were looking, it goes way back to when it was before Dr. Bussler's time, and it was Courtney's first year on the board when we were in Milwaukee. We had an exercise in which we asked ourselves, okay, is there anything you'd like to see happen in the district? What's your dream for it? And if there is that item, what would be the hurdles for implementing it? That was when Courtney was the youngest board member, and we asked her to go first, and she said, why don't we have world languages taught in elementary school? And we all looked at each other and said, yeah, why don't we? So that was one of the items. One of the things that I raised was, why don't we have independent learning plans for all of our students? Why is it restricted to just those who have IEPs or 504 plans to go through that? And so we have been discussing that ever since. That goes back 15, 16 years ago, where it really started to make its way into board papers is in May of 2010 with the Initiatives for Student Success in the 21st Century, the assessment paper. We talked about graduation standards and how we measure that in light of 21st century skills and personalized learning. And we began at that time to talk about starting student portfolios and perhaps capstone projects. And so we appointed a high school graduation task force at that point in time to review the graduation credit in line with those type of thoughts in terms of individualization and electronic or personalized plans or portfolios, individual learning plans, and to come back to the district, to the board with any recommendations. We also had thought about doing an ILP leadership group to talk about offering a class in the freshman year designed to assist the transition in there, an advisory process for sophomores and juniors to do their work, and then in the senior year, looking at a capstone. That was sort of a rough idea of what it might look like, but we didn't know, so we talked about getting an ILP leadership together at that point in time. The graduation task force eventually reported back to us, which is when the current graduation policy was adopted based on those recommendations. They changed some of the credit numbers in 41101, so we made some changes there. I think we increased the math or science credits. We added the community service at that point in time. And we upped the credits that had to be required from 22 to 23, so that change was made in 41101. There was also a recommendation to blend what were then the district exit outcomes into the graduation policy. They had been adopted board policy. We weren't following or measuring them, and they did measure 21st century skills, or at least talk about those 24th century skills. For example, skills to be a quality producer, critical thinking and problem solving skills, environmental responsibility, skills for personal growth and character. So those were all embedded in what was at that time the exit outcomes, and they got embedded then into our graduation requirement. And back when that change was made, we provided for a lead time by which to measure those non-Carnegie unit elements of the graduation policy until June of 2018. Okay. A lot of stuff happened in 2011 through 2014 and 2015, and this just sort of got put on the back burner. Then in a couple of years ago, in the path forward, we talked about the graduation standards in that document. That starts on page 8. Looking for that. That was the summary of what the task force did. And then on page 13, we talked about the graduation task force moving forward and the changes that were made. And we adopted then the 5 values. Okay. So into that paper, we talked about implementing those values. And what has gone untouched at this point in time with respect to the board, and I don't think has been really put into practice, is the elements in 41102 in terms of assessment for graduation standards. So one of the things we got to do is examine where we're at with that, because obviously the time deadline is not there for doing this stuff. So we'll have to reevaluate that. The second thing is do we really want to proceed with this in the current form? And if so, what's the time deadline for that? So that was the impetus for putting this on an agenda for policy, because this is obviously our graduation policy, but then to kind of figure out where we're at. Courtney, did I miss anything through that?
No.
Okay.
My recollection is that 1102 is a direct lift from the graduation task force, right?
It's a direct lift from the items A through E were from the district exit outcomes.
Oh, they were.
Yeah, those were items directly from the exit outcomes that had been along for a long time.
And the graduation task force recommendation was just to adopt those?
Yes, to blend those in, because there was strong affirmance of the district exit outcomes as indicative of 21st century skills and consistent with moving toward individualized learning.
Remind me who was on the graduation task force?
I don't,
Or was it educators,
yes, yeah.
board members?
Yeah, Leslie's indicating. Leslie, why don't you come on up, because you were working with us at that, and chime in at any time. I mean, part of working as a committee of the wholes, we don't have to be polite in terms of procedure and decorum. No, we could be kind, but in terms of the formal rules. So Leslie, jump in whenever. What's your?
Thanks.
Can you recap too? Is that?
Yes, I remember the graduation task force. I believe it was chaired by Anita Kaler and Chris Legacki. Does that sound familiar to everybody? Mm-hmm. So it was a while ago. I invite Jim and John and any of my administrative colleagues who have comments that they want to make to come on up whenever they would like to. But it's pretty interesting to think that much of this was written in 1992, because in actuality, right now, as you read through 41102, there are skills that are outlined in the Common Core State Standards, which came much more than a decade after that. In addition, they are skills that align well with John Hattie's characteristics of visible learners, which we've been really relying on heavily as part of our personalized learning efforts. And then finally, they're well aligned to academic and career planning, the state mandate that came about just a while ago. So if they started in 1992, they were a couple of decades ahead of their time. But where I'd say we are right now is the students who are taking a senior seminar are using that experience to gather the evidence that they've accumulated over the course of their high school time to show that they have demonstrated these particular skills and characteristics. So if any of you recently participated, I know Krista was there, and a few of us were also there to see how the portfolio piece has evolved. And I think it has, I think it is much more aligned as we have done this a few times now, cleaner, crisper. The students are able to make better references back to 41102. So I think that that is one direction that helps, I guess, show that students are giving thoughtful reflection to the acquisition of these particular skills. However, we've also spoken about the fact that we want them to be thinking about these things over the course of time and not just as part of a culminating activity. We want them to be reflective thinkers and learners throughout the course of their experiences with us. And there are multiple ways to do that. But I think in some of my conversations with board members, I have heard and I've been reflecting on the idea that the conversations with potential community mentors perhaps comes too late in their career here with us. And that if they had an opportunity to share some of these things, share some of the plans they have for their future with community mentors earlier on, that perhaps they'd be able to provide more personalized guidance for students related to course selection, potential experiences and contacts. Consequently, Jim and I and members of Jim's team have been talking about how to embed an experience similar to the senior portfolio interviews that occurred last week. Have sort of part one occur perhaps when they are sophomores, and then part two as seniors as part of a follow-up. And Jim, I know you've been thinking about this quite a lot, so feel free to chime in.
I have to be careful because I think I could go on a long time about this, but my very first, what's that? Perfect. The very first day that I served as, prior to being serving in my first day as principal, the very first time I assembled with the Oregon staff as a high school, we put forward, we were looking for what qualities and characteristics do we want for Oregon graduates, and that was my very first experience with the high school. It was on a half-day PD day, and from that we generated a list of skills, dispositions, and characteristics that we want for our kids when they leave us. And only later did I see 41102 and thought, that is so well aligned. It was amazing to see just how straight on our staff was with that board policy. We have spent the last few years, or the last couple of years, working through 41102 and the notion of how that connects to the idea that we want every single kid to leave us with a post-secondary plan. And I think that in year two of our pilots with our senior seminar exit interviews, that has gotten tighter. And Leslie mentioned the notion of reflection, and not just having reflection be a part of student learning at the very end. We've got a couple of PLCs in our English right now in particular that I'm just amazed right now at the depth that students are having to reflect on their own learning aligned to outcomes and targets, and how key and critical that is. And that is really a movement that is going to be widening within our building, that students is student engaged assessment and student assessment capable learners is a really key element of what we're seeing happen. So I'm really encouraged by what we're seeing. I think that our senior seminar students have left a lot of feedback for us about their experiences that's really valuable. And I really do want to see something go to scale that allows each and every kid to reflect backwards on what they've accomplished here, but also, most importantly, to reflect forward. Whether it is, it's a process that we're trying to prepare kids for, and it has been, I think, quite promising.
I'd also have to say our professional development has been focusing in on how to build student learning experiences that build these things, right? Because this doesn't just happen, it happens with great intention and skill on the part of the teacher also. And so we've really been honing in on increasing our ability to put tasks in front of students that help them develop these skills in particular.
And our theory of action is it is 41102 in action. It's reading, writing, critical thinking, collaborating with others, and that is a thread that we want to see. It's on the wall in every classroom, and it's on our head. It's on the wall back here. Again, it's those critical skills that we want to see woven through every single aspect of a student's day and across the curriculum. And so getting to the point of how we verify that each and every kid is engaged in deep and significant learning, reflection on their own learning, and charting a pathway forward, I think is absolutely something we need to systematize with next steps.
So the senior seminar is an elective right now,
It is an elective right now.
so not all seniors take it.
That's correct.
And the students that take that then do the portfolio review at the end.
They do.
Only the kids that are taking senior seminar that are doing the portfolio.
That is correct.
How many,
We had 5 sections this year, and we had, so it was about 125 kids, and previous year, I think we were at 6. Oh, no, about a little more than that, about a third. Yep. Yeah, man, not quite that much, but yeah. Yep.
So is the thought process that this could become a widespread, like a non-elective, but a part of the required coursework?
We came to vision, was policy, we went to policy, and with the idea that we would like to give kids a couple of options. Number one, we want every kid to have a plan. Senior seminar is a great opportunity for kids to be guided through a process using career cruising, staff mentors. It embeds a lot of strands of important career planning and planning for college, budgeting, etc. So that is one way to meet a lot of those big points. But we also realize that students have the opportunity to chart their own pathway. And Mr. Granberg's here today. He is in charge of our school to career programs, and some kids have significant learning programs that they're engaging in for as much as half of their day that are really consistent with their path beyond here. And as we build in reflection opportunities and a chance for them to share, I see that as a substitute, you know. So for example, if we had a chunk of students who decided I'm going to go with option A, which is senior seminar and that pathway, other students who engage with Greg's programming through school to career might take a slightly different route to satisfy that kind of that school to real world connection that we want every single kid to have. In addition to that, there are other options that we see students that might be able to pursue. Our home construction program, where we've got 15 students each year that spend a good portion, half of their day, engaging in building, and many of those students leave us and go either into an apprenticeship or into a construction program at MATC to further their learning. So when we talked in policy, we brought forward the notion that maybe there would be pathways for students to pursue to hit the key elements of 41102.
And have these capstone experiences.
Absolutely.
That was really intriguing to us as a policy committee, that we're not this, everybody's got to do this, but there are multiple ways because kids are very different. There are multiple ways that they could verify that they've met the graduation requirements, so I think we have to be open to different opportunities for kids.
In that same vein, I guess when I read 41102 and I look through it, it's like this is an amazing list of comprehensive skills and things that we want our graduates to understand and be stewards for in the future. But sometimes I look at these and I go, is this right for every student? I look at this as there are so many areas where I'm just picking one out, tools and understanding necessary to contribute to local and global communities. So that may not resonate with some students, but others may resonate very well with others. So part of me wants to look at whether that pathway could also be selecting or choosing the areas of most value to a student, or I don't know, maybe I'm off base, but when I read through the list, I feel like it's really a little intimidating almost to expect this many skills to be demonstrated by a student to graduate, and not to say that they're all not very valuable. I just think that might be something we could look at a little more closely. It just seems like a really daunting task.
Well, spirit of the law and letter of the law, right? Sure. I think that in a sense we want every single kid to engage in deep and critical thinking, to have experiences at Oregon High School. I know our students value the electives. When our seniors leave us, That is the number one response year after year. They value the variety of courses that we offer. And when you sit and you talk deeply in these exit interviews, you can speak to one kid and music and drama is their passion. And I would never have steered them away from that. And I leave convinced that that student has found their path here. And then the next student who is, is the trades. They've discovered the fact that that they want to build and they want to be involved with something that's really consistent with a lot of the learning experiences they've had here and everywhere in between. On the heels of graduation yesterday and handing out diplomas, I'm convinced that our kids have a great opportunity here to experience so many things, and I think that an opportunity to tell their story is also a gift because it gives them a chance to really reflect back on what they've accomplished here, to give us feedback on how we did and what we can do better, and then to chart a path forward. We've visited districts that have been doing this for years, some more recent than others, and some who've been doing it for a very, very long time. And they found that, number one, the people who've participated from the outside walked away saying two things. Man, we've got great kids. We've got an amazing group of kids. And number two, they also said, we've got a great school district, complete with staff. And they walked away with a sense of what the students in their communities were learning and engaging in and left completely impressed by that experience. And, it is I had the opportunity last week and Greg helped organize with Sarah Kissling that experience. And I had a chance to interview two kids with Wendell across the street, who was our community member. And we just had a great discussion. And I think it's a gift if we look at it a way for our kids to give us feedback on their experiences here.
And I want to keep going on that pathway route too, because one thing we didn't mention, and it's a really important and legitimate pathway, is the Global Education Certificate. One of the students who earned it, one of the students who graduated yesterday and earned it, sent us her portfolio for the Global Education Certificate, and it was multiple artifacts that demonstrated her ability to be globally competent and be a responsible global citizen, and what that meant to her and what different experiences have done to contribute to her ability to think globally. And so I agree with you, Anna, that I think maybe there are ways for students to demonstrate many of these skills through one area of passion and not necessarily have to come up with an artifact for each one of these skills in 41102.
Yeah, I mean, one of the kids that I had, I think the self-reflections are getting deeper because I think of the way that we are teaching and learning, but kids tend to key in on maybe one of these, but they're exhibiting others through that. So maybe they're talking about problem-solving, critical thinking, but they've done a presentation, multimedia, to talk about how they learned that.
Right.
Or global, and they're using some other, so it's really embedded, I think, in this lever 5 that we're all working toward, is that these things are coming through that. And I mean, I've done it now for 2 years, and these last ones, and I don't think it was just the kids that I interviewed, that there's, and I've talked to Sarah Kissling about it too, that there's just this deeper piece of the reflection, that it's not also just about a schoolwork artifact, it's what's going on in their lives and maybe the mental health issue they're dealing with. And so I think we are getting there in ways that we don't really realize yet.
And Sarah has participated in particular in an AIW team, where a cross-disciplinary team where they have focused deeply on constructing tasks and giving students opportunity to reflect. And we've seen that have a big impact. And so she's really excited about where that course is going. As far as we had talked about senior seminar being one option, and then we were brainstorming a little bit about those alternate capstone experiences that might sub in with significant reflection and a chance to exit. Home construction class I'd mentioned, school to career apprenticeship, enrollment in early college now program, global ed achievement certificate that Leslie mentioned, DPI seal of biliteracy, student designed and staff supported inquiry projects, passion projects, and presentations associated.
Like Peter Critch's class is an excellent example.
The independent science research class, yes, where they research and present findings, or other significant leadership experience where students have engaged in opportunities to lead and to reflect on kind of the impact of that leadership would be all, and that list could continue.
I'm going to jump in here because I think we've confirmed here that the skills that are listed are still valid, and the senior seminar seems to be reflecting that we're doing that and helping the kids do it. So we're a half hour into our 1 hour discussion, and I guess we can't finish this today, but my question is, where do y'all want to go in terms of, is this policy as it's written matching up with where we want to go, or do we need to have some further discussion on the way the policy is written and how it seems to envision implementation versus what seems to be happening right now, which is the kids are reflecting on these things in senior seminar. A lot of these things are embedded in the way curriculum is being taught. Do we still want to have personal learning plans? And then there's the question of, in my mind, how this all relates to the 4 C's, culture and character. There are aspects of this that touch on those issues. So where do we want to go with this discussion? Any thoughts on that?
Academic and career plans are mandated statewide from 7th grade on up, and I think we're trying to engage a little bit earlier even in some of those, and I think that gives rise to ILPs. I mean, that dovetails really well with ILPs. We're talking about our English PLC, our English 9 PLC is really focusing on cultivating student reflection, and I spoke to a couple of members of that team today about opportunities to help support this work associated with their English curriculum that they're revamping on a large scale. We do, our sophomore health class is a class that does a lot of academic and career planning, and I see that as an opportunity, as Leslie mentioned, because every single sophomore student goes through health, is a chance to have a kind of that interim, that halftime check-in with community members. And there's another school that we've collaborated with on a number of projects where Sarah went over and checked out some sophomore interviews that would be a little bit different than I think what we've discussed here, but nonetheless were an interview with sophomore students and community members. I could see us evolving that toward our vision. Junior conferences are a great opportunity for all of our student services to help plan. And if we were to take kind of this tiered approach where senior seminar, I believe senior seminar could happen either second semester of your junior year or in your senior year, because second semester juniors are really aligned. In many cases, that is where a lot of key decisions are made before you start applying to colleges early in your senior year, in that early window. And so I would see opening that pathway. If we were to say students can satisfy 41102 graduation policy multiple ways. One would be to take senior seminar in your last 3 semesters. We also have a blended version of that we piloted the last year as well. Second opportunity would be to design a separate capstone experience as a way of satisfying that, as well as embedding reflection. I see us, if you want to talk one more level of implementation, and you're teeing me up. You want me to finish my sentence? Finish my sentence quick. Finish my sentence would be, we have 4 drop-in conference nights a year, and the fall gets more than the spring, and the spring first night gets more than the last night. And, it's not very busy by that time of year because parents have really good access to teachers. I could see us taking that last drop-in conference and repurposing it for staff and community panels to do a wall-to-wall review of senior portfolios. And I could see that being something that we could accomplish with the resources that we have.
And do you envision that, Jim, for those who still choose that, or for everybody?
I think there's high value to it, and I would advocate that in short time that we take it to scale. And I know that Steve had mentioned earlier that at one point there was a vision around a kind of a step-in class with freshman year. That would be kind of a requirement that would build off. That's a different way of looking at it. And, a case could be made that way as well. But I could see us as we're getting ready to launch kids from where they are currently to their next stop, to have a pretty significant opportunity to reflect on their experiences here and their path forward, and getting a bunch of support.
My goal was just to hit the pause button for a second. And the reason for the pause button is the way the policy was written in 2013 helped us get to where we are in 2019. And while we didn't get everything right, we placed the capstone project for a couple of years on hold. I think now is the time for us to get a small group together to freshen up the policy and to make sure that in A through E, we have a marvelous list of expectations and ideas and priorities. And it does go back to 1992. Let's figure out a way to operationalize that so it makes sense to students and to families, so that we can tie some metrics to it. Obviously, Jim and Leslie would be perfect to work with a small group of board members on this and to make some changes. Something that we didn't spend a lot of time talking about right now, I think the community service component was invaluable in terms of getting young people out into the community and fostering that sense of giving back and participating in different events. And I remember some of there were lots of concerns with that when we started it, and all kinds of reasons why we couldn't verify and make it valid. And part of the point of learning, when it's my learning, I'll take care of it. And when it's my learning and I value it, we have kids that far exceed 30 hours of community service. And it's also connected to our 5 values, which didn't exist when we wrote the policy. The pathway option that Jim had mentioned, the couple of check-ins, whether we do it once or twice. And now I'm talking more process-wise. I'd love to have a group of sort of policymakers from the board working with administrators and possibly some staff members as well to bring back a recommendation for what the next iteration looks like. And then I'll look down the road a little bit. There'll be another iteration. In another 5 or 10 years, we'll make it better again. I think the key is don't let too much time lapse. Try to learn in at least 5-year increments, or maybe 10-year increments at the most, so we can continue to make that next change. I know Jim is likely at some point going to share his interest in increasing our graduation requirements from 23. It's not a conversation for tonight, but that would be a great conversation for that committee to have.
So we don't have this as an action item tonight. So I think that means it would need to go to a future board meeting if we were going to form a small group to look more deeply at this policy. Am I right?
The board would have to commission.
Board would have
A
to name a
group.
task force?
Yes.
Is that how
Right.
it's a task force?
Yes.
Or-
committees,
I would think so.
On ad hoc
What's the process
committees.
on that? If that's it.
I'm looking toward the chair. I'm assuming that we put this as an action item on a future agenda? Okay.
I was going to make one comment, Barb, with your question about how we incorporate the 4 Cs. And I think this list totally is the 4 Cs. I mean, that's basically what it's doing. It's offering a way to demonstrate the value of community, what are they? Culture, character, competency. This is not, maybe not the competency part, because that's more in the 41101, but the 41102, in my opinion, is basically there to serve the other Cs. So I think that's what this list, in my opinion, is gauging. So it's here. I think we can just, it's right there.
Yeah, the reason I mentioned that is because I think there's been conversation about whether the 4Cs is still the right thing for us. So that could be part of that discussion or part of another discussion.
I mean, I think we always get stuck in the measurement part.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, education
Right.
is hard to measure, and everyone's different, and so that tends to get us this place of, So, but maybe we need to look at measurement differently.
Mm-hmm.
Before we wrap up, does anybody want to make some comments on what we've heard so far? Then our next item to discuss is the electronic surveillance. And we had something on the agenda with some changes to that policy. And I guess before we start, I'm just wondering where this came from.
The impetus for this was from the school safety grant program where there was reference to adding cameras throughout the district in different buildings. And I asked for where do we have cameras now with that? And we have cameras in buildings other than the high school. And 931 indicates that this policy is restricted solely to the high school. So it was the broader question is we obviously need to change this because in practice we have cameras that exceed the location identified in this. So we'll at the minimum have to modify it to broaden the geographic location of those. So that was why I suggested we take a look at it.
So, again, this isn't an item we can take action on tonight. So we're just going to have some general discussion on the working draft that we have in front of us. And Steve, did you put this draft together?
I think Gina did.
Okay, great. I wonder if it'd be helpful if some of the changes in here, Gina, you told us a little bit where they came from or what they're about.
Okay. And I will look to Andy to help me because he has been the lead on our safety and security of the past, well, I guess since we've started this journey with the cameras, and that has been a bigger job than I think anybody anticipated in terms of the security for our buildings with our grant. So I appreciate his help on that. Steve had asked that we put together a draft to try to memorialize what we're currently doing and what the grant looks like. So if at any point you have questions, just please stop me. As Steve talked about in 93101, we are proposing to delete Oregon High School because we have cameras in all of our buildings and at the pool. I would say we have, and Andy, you're going to have to help me with the terminology, but the way that I look at it, if you look at 93101.1, we have cameras that are actively monitored in terms of our entrances. So our receptionist at the desk does see in each of our doors, like for example in district office, we have a back door and we have a front door. That back door is staff only and it has an intercom and there's a camera in that hallway. And then the front door you are familiar with that has a camera. So she sees that, or he, on the screen. So that is an active monitoring system that we have in all of our entrances. Then we also have cameras that are not actively monitored, but they're recording. So for example, the high school commons, we would have cameras on the commons, but no one is sitting there watching them unless there is an issue that we learn about. An administrator may go on the camera to see what's happening, but more likely they're going down in person. So what we really use those for is they record, and if there's an incident, then administrators go back and look at the recording. And So just to let you know, that's where we are right now. Andy, what would you add to that?
The only thing I would add is we may actively monitor like parking lots outside the building as well as those entrances. So areas where the public might be approaching the building type of thing.
So we changed 93101 to encompass that we're monitoring them as needed for safety, health, and welfare of students, staff, and others. So we made it, instead of a negative, we turned it into an affirmative statement, but we're looking for your guidance on that. I would say in terms of who looks at the court recordings, we try to keep that into a very limited group of people. Right now, it's select administrators. Brian has access, although I don't know if he has done that, and then Andy as well. We do have Sherry in our office has been trained to take a recording and put it on like a disk drive for the police department, because we have been getting requests from them. So it's a very narrow group of administrators that are trained on the system and can access the system.
Do administrators have to sign something in terms of, or like what is the understanding in terms of you have access to this, here's the law?
So what DPI talks about in terms of pupil records is that educational staff can have access as needed for instructional or safety purposes. There are select statutes that apply to the police department in terms of what they can have access to and if it's an adult or a juvenile issue. And then there's certain exceptions for like health and human services workers. So it's a pretty detailed statute. But that is why we try to keep it really narrow, because it is for just for an educational or a safety purpose.
So is there a sign-off that recognizes what is specific to that individual?
So thank you. So under FERPA, which is the federal law, if anyone receives a copy of an educational record, we are required to log that. And we do log that in IC. So if parents or guardians wanted to request who is accessing the record, we're required to produce that. I believe the camera system keeps a record of who logs in and out into the system, and Andy can run a report on that.
I haven't done that, but I do think there is a capability of that.
When we talked, is it Gen X, is that the vendor? When we had talked to them, they told us that the system has that capacity. Does that answer your question?
No, not
Okay.
exactly. Are people who have access to that information aware of the laws that...
Oh, thank you.
Yes. Are they aware of the laws that they need to follow by having access?
Yes, we do talk extensively with them because it is a narrow group. So it's our administrative team, and I would say mainly the high school and middle school administrators are the ones that are using the camera, and then Sherry and Andy.
Did you say the police sometimes ask for access?
They do. So we have worked out a system with them where there are certain things they have to certify. I don't know if that's me, if I'm too close. There are certain requirements they have to certify in the statute that it is part of a juvenile criminal investigation, that they will not share it outside of law enforcement. So we have developed a form that they sign off and certify on those requirements, and they give a copy to the building principal, who then sends it to me so that we can log it in IC for FERPA purposes. If it's an adult issue, then they have to obtain a subpoena or a warrant for that. The 93101.3, we talk about that the video camera system may be used for investigations, because it was unclear to me if that meant just student disciplinary investigations, and so we wanted to let people know that we do use that for staff investigations as well. So there may be a more encompassing way to say that. We made a separate section of 93101.06 to separate it, to let people know that under no circumstances will video cameras be used in anywhere where people have a reasonable expectation of privacy. That was embedded in 93101.5. We just made it a separate section to make it more prominent and then also to make 93102 easier to read. 93102, the board had authorized that in limited cases, we could use our cameras for surveillance. So Andy, do you want to give an example of that had happened a few years ago, or maybe even before my time? The limited surveillance.
Okay, if we, there we go. In the past, if there was a situation where we didn't have a camera in a certain location, but there was a certain behavior that was occurring, what can happen is the administrator can ask the superintendent for more of a hidden camera. Again, we would not put that in any area that people would have a reasonable expectation of privacy. But it could be, for instance, something's missing out of a desk drawer in the middle of the night type of thing, and we're like, oh, what's going on in there? And it's a consistent behavior. And those situations, we might authorize a covert camera to be placed so that we can figure out what's happening.
Oh, yes.
Before you went on to O2, we struck the information about signage.
Yes.
Not required to let people know?
So I was going to come back to that. So that's a bigger topic for you to wrestle with as a board. What we talked about with Erica, and it's a decision point for all of you, is that because we have the board policy, and that's on our website, and we're going to have also this in our employee handbook, is that most people agree that that's sufficient notice for the public and for staff that we have cameras. So we wouldn't be required to have signage. So I think that's a decision point for each of you if you would like us to have signage. One thing we talked about with Erica is that balance between letting people know what the expectation is when they come into our buildings, and also, you know, what you want the first message for people to see when they come in. So if you think about, you know, we could have signs that say, you know, no weapons, no smoking, no vaping, you're on camera, you know, but then how does that feel as the first message when you enter the building? And
That's exactly the point.
And so we talked about, if the board would like that, then we'd like to work with Erica about how can we do that in the best way possible to have it be a positive, still welcoming message, but still letting people know what the expectations are when you enter our buildings. And so right now we have signage on some of our buildings, but we don't have it on all. So when you ask to say what does the policy look like in terms of what we're currently doing, I think it's fair to say we don't have up-to-date signage on all of our buildings. But if you would like that, we are certainly willing to do that, and would like to work with Erica on the best way to message that. So, you know, when you first come to us, it's a positive, welcoming message. We did, just let you know, we did talk about, and then too, do we have that in Spanish and in English, and what does that look like? So we have been talking about that signage a lot.
But from a legal perspective, you feel like it's covered because it's on the website and
And it's also a different, yes, and it's also a different time. I would say, and these just might be the calls that come to me, another issue that I wanted to put for your consideration is that it feels as though people expect that we have cameras, and we've had a handful of situations where we've had accidents in the parking lot that don't involve a disciplinary issue, and that is a public space, but we have had insurance companies and or parents ask for that footage because their insurance company is asking for it in terms of an accident. How we have wrestled with that is because it isn't an educational record, there was no discipline attached, that in order to stay neutral, so far it's been a two-party accident, we have offered the footage to both parties so that both families have the video. But it is something that you could tell us, not to do in the future, or only give it to someone who asks. That's how we have navigated that. So it feels as though I don't know that they know their cameras, they just expect that we would have cameras. And you can tell in some of the footage that the kids certainly know we have cameras. So, but yes, legally, I don't know that we need the signage, but if it's something that you want, we're certainly willing to do that. I guess my opinion would be, I think there could be ways to incorporate signage that does have a positive approach for the safety of our students and our staff this property is under surveillance, or, we have surveillance cameras on site. It may also deter certain behaviors, if that's something that would be helpful for people to realize. So there may be value with still presenting it in a positive way that could deter any sort of behavior we don't want happening. Now, would that surveillance sign need to also, are there already signs that say the no smoking, the no vaping, the no all of those other things that you referenced? Are those already at our buildings as well, or would?
Not to my knowledge. There are signs occasionally here and there. When the concealed carry happened, it's the the
Sure, no
weapon
weapon.
and the knife with the
Yeah.
cross through them. A few of those exist still, but over the last several years, we've added offices and those types of things. And when those have gone up, we haven't added those signs in those places.
Sure, okay. That was my only comment on that.
I've got a couple questions. How many cameras do we have now in each building?
I don't know off the top of my head how many are in each building, but I think there are somewhere in the 80-some range of cameras. I don't know how the units, I guess you would say,
Across the district.
across the district. Majority of them in the high school, the vast majority of them in the high school. Some buildings may only have a couple.
Thanks. Go ahead.
And those mostly just at the entrance.
The other schools, mostly at the entrance, yes. Office areas, just to kind of monitor if something were to happen. Those are areas that we want to see. And yeah, mostly at the entrances though.
Looks like at the commons areas too, at least from.
Sure. The Rome Corners has one in the commons.
I guess I would offer another comment related to who has access to those videos. I guess I wouldn't want that to become a frequent task that now requires a lot of staff management for those requests. So not that it's a bad thing to provide it, but if it's something that is taking more time and isn't providing the value of the educational or safety value that we've identified as the purpose and role for those security cameras, that I wouldn't be opposed to saying we're not really going to be in the business of releasing videos for those sorts of investigations. My personal opinion.
What's the technical access? I mean, can one person look at all 80 cameras or have access to all 80 cameras?
Have access, yes.
Yeah. And how does that done? Is that through a web-based site?
There is a web-based site. There's also, which is a little cumbersome, there's also a client that would sit on a computer. That takes quite a bit of setup to do that. The resources that computer has to be looked at and evaluated by technology, so there's not many of them that exist.
So how many people have total access to all 80 cameras?
Without looking at the system, I would guess 10, 8, 10, something like that. APs, some principals, myself, Sherry.
Okay. If I have access to one camera, do I have access to all 80, Andy?
We could set it up so we could limit your access to that. So not necessarily, no.
Okay.
Today with those 8 or 10, access to everything?
Pretty much, yeah. We haven't set up because there's so limited number of people. We limited. I would say that I want to be clear on this, and we are kind of transitioning. The secretaries, they don't have the ability to do playback or anything, but they have the ability just to see those cameras that are entrances, the live ones, right, like that.
And if I could just jump in, the reason that we gave Sherry access is really because of the police department. They often need a very quick turnaround time. And so, if they come in the morning and they want it by the afternoon, frequently Andy or Jim are not available to make that recording. So that was something we did in order to get them what they need more quickly.
Does staff know that we're going to use these in investigations?
Once we revise the policy, if that's what you determine to do.
I just remember when we first adopted this, I had made the suggestion that if we were going to use this for the health and safety of students, that we ought to do it for the teachers. And let's just say that the reaction wasn't positive.
I understand that. I think it makes sense given that we have them. If we have a student that says that a teacher hit that student and that's in an area where we have a camera, it can be used to exonerate the teacher as well. So I think it really can work both ways, but it certainly is a decision for the board to make if you want us to use them in investigations or not.
So what's the next step with this?
I just have one more question. So, Gina, you said the police can access the recordings for students if they are doing some kind of investigation, but not for adults.
Correct. They would, if it was part of an adult investigation, they need a subpoena or a warrant, and that's by state statute.
Okay.
Tim, the next step would be that if there's some consensus or at least interest in bringing the draft of the revised policy as an action item to the next meeting, that's how we would move that along. Then it would be on the agenda for the next time. So I gotta, Barb, find out if there's a sense if that's the direction that, at least a significant number of the board members want to have happen.
So, thoughts on that?
I think we have to have a policy that's more in line with our practice, and so I think it needs to come before the board.
Okay, so I'll put it on the July meeting as an action item, and we'll use the draft that we've got tonight. Good.
Discuss the pros and cons in the official capacity.
Yep.
Okay.
It'll have to come in that setting. It'll have to come with a motion to approve for discussion, and with a second, then we can discuss that. But yeah. Okay.
Now, just a procedural question. I thought that these maps were a confidential document.
Yeah.
So that means we should not be letting them lay around here when we leave, correct? Gina, is that right? Okay, all right, so everybody, easiest thing is turn them in, I guess. We had one more item to discuss, and that was, we've had some discussion about screen time. It's 7:02. Steve, what are your thoughts about proceeding with that discussion, or should we?
I think we should move on tonight and then put
Okay.
that on for the next.
Sounds good.
All right, let me get my paperwork out of the way here. Thanks, Barb, for leading that. All right, I'll need a motion to adjourn out of the committee of the whole and return to meeting of the regular board. Is there a motion?
Yes, so moved.
Hannah with the motion, Courtney with the second. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? We are back into regular session at 7:04. And I see our Parent Advisory Council group is here. Hi, guys. Hello. We'll be with you in about 2 minutes. We just have a few kind of housekeeping things to deal with, and then you're first on the agenda. Items on the consent calendar. Item B, is there any item that any board member wishes removed? Seeing none, I would need a motion to entertain the consent calendar items.
So moved.
Motion from Ms. Flanagan, is there a second?
Second.
Second, Ms. Bijak. I would note that we have a number of donations. We have a in-kind donation of Quick Trip for water and pastries for the bike rodeo. The American Heart Association donated $500 to Brooklyn's physical movement education equipment. The Bonsettville family donated $200 for a splash pad. UW Health donated $500 for a UW Health scholarship. The Friends of the Oregon School District contributed $500 for a conference registration for a student. The Oregon Rotary Club donated $275 to the district. Wisco Industries donated a $1,000 scholarship. Rob Goose donated $200 for the splash pad. Heather and David Jackson donated $500 for the Oregon Middle School in appreciation for support and services for students with disabilities. And then we had donations from Ildi Martonvi, William Rayrauer, and Daryl Goins for PAC donations. And so we thank them for their contributions to the district. We got a motion and a second, so we need a roll call because we have contracts on this.
Ms. Flanagan?
Yes.
Ms. Bijak?
Yes.
Ms. Feeney?
Yes.
Ms. Oderico?
Yes.
Mr. LeBrun?
Yes, with the exception of approval of the minutes. I was not at the last meeting.
We will mark you as abstained.
Thank you.
Mr. Zach?
Yes, a motion on the consent calendar, items on the consent calendar pass. That takes us to agenda item C, communication from the public. 18004 of our board policy establishes an opportunity for any member of the public to address the board. Has anybody registered, Katie? Anybody from the public here? Once, twice, gone. Informational items, OEA report, and I did not see anyone tonight. Hi, Becken.
Hello.
Congratulations.
Thanks.
You're a graduate.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy.
Very good. Did you go to the lock-in last night?
I did.
Yeah, so sleep was at a premium, right?
Yeah, I'm a little tired.
Anything to report?
No, it was really fun. I loved it.
It was a great ceremony, wasn't it? Yeah,
The
good.
weekend was really great. I loved
Good
it.
for you. Thanks. Okay, action items, and this is more informational, but the Parent Advisory Council report. Krista, do you want to talk at the beginning and introduce, and then if we could have the folks come on up and...
If you guys want to come on up to the table, and then I'll just give a little bit of our Tim wants to come. Just to give the board a little bit of background, most people are aware. In January of 2018, we convened a task force from the Board of Athletics and Youth Sports, so athletics grades 7 through 12, and youth sports being kindergarten through 6th grade. And the reason we did that was because there was a similar task force back in 2005. And so it had been over 10 years since we kind of looked at sports, and just things had kind of changed in the landscape. And so what we did is convened a group of, I was the board member, Mike Carr, our director of athletics, was the co-chair, and we convened administrators, teachers, as well as community members, and you see community members here, as well as Dawn, our principal at Fairview. And so what we did is we did a lot of research about the concept of youth sports and what was happening nationally, looked at what other communities were doing, and really kind of surveyed the landscape, because we know that 45% of our high schoolers and 44% of our middle schoolers participate in some sport, and so that's a large percentage of our student body, and we know that there's a lot of value through the participation in sports. And I think what you saw in our graduation requirement and those skills that we want our graduates to have as they leave the building, as they did Sunday, that sports teaches a lot of those things. And so when we started doing the research, we really found kind of 4 areas of emphasis, and we also had a youth summit where we had over 90 community members come back for 2 nights to really study this issue. We found that there are some really interesting things going on in terms of participation costs, in terms of how much youth sports and athletic cost these days, who can participate in them, and there's really starting to be a divide based on income, that kids are specializing earlier and quitting sooner. And that there's kind of this, sometimes a disconnect between the parent and the child in terms of expectations, and then in terms of coach training, that there aren't as many trained coaches in what we would consider, or the industry would consider, important skills, and most coaches are men. And so as a task force, we came up with 3 recommendations. The first was to do a survey of our student body, 4th grade through 12, about their participation experiences or non-participation experiences, or why are they quitting participation. We've done that survey, but the board has yet to hear the results, so hopefully that will be coming soon. And then form a consortium was the second recommendation, that Mike, as our athletic director, and then would meet with youth sports organizations and see if they could come up with some best practices and really talk about what are the commonalities and things that we could all do together as a community. And then the third recommendation had to do with the Parent Advisory Council. And so Tim Erickson was a member of our task force, and he graciously took the lead with Dawn and brought some other community members on board. And so they are here with their report. Tim.
Thank you. So Steve, thanks for putting us on the agenda.
Yep.
Dr. Bustler, thanks for having us here, and the school board. So there's a couple slides I just wanted to show you tonight to document our progress and where we're at. And part of that will be looking for your approval to move forward with a few ideas that we have regarding the Parent Advisory Council. On the screen, you'll see these are the members of the council as of today. I wanted to thank each of them. Those that are here in particular, Chad Gladden sitting to my far right, Greg Connop, obviously Dawn, Kristen Carstensen, and Katie Heitz, also part of it. Missing tonight would be Dave Jameson, Rob Schmidt, and Carl Fry. The nice thing about our advisory council is we're pretty well rounded. We have kids that are either in high school, have graduated high school, haven't started school yet, middle school, grade school. So good ideas, a lot of unique perspectives. Who's my next slide guy? Andrew? Thanks, Andy. I appreciate that. So as Chris has said, you know, we had 3 concepts come up with a sports task force. We're focusing on the third one. You can read it there, but the basic take home is we want to get people to understand what it means to be a sport parent, not a screaming parent from the sideline, because that has implications, as you'll see, across many different things. So the task force, again, not our council, but there are some areas of emphasis that we're taking a look at. Some of those being this Oregon, our One Oregon concept. We'll tie that into some of the future, or some of the slides coming up in the future of this presentation. And then communication, the benchmarking piece. Got to have some data. Got to collect your data, see where you're at to know what you know. And then more focused to us would be this parent and coach education. To teach some positivity for parents about what it is to be a sport parent. So through the meetings of our advisory council, we came up with a couple common themes, or a couple things we identified. As Krista said, there's a high rate of kids quitting sports by a very young age. 3 out of 4 kids nationally do this, but Oregon fares out a little bit better as far as participation goes, but doesn't mean they haven't quit a sport. And that's what we're trying to figure out from the data poll. Is why? Is it accessibility? Is it some other things? I'll leave that to the other group. It was really good to have Dave Jameson on our board because he is a game official. They're not referees anymore, just so we all know. They're game officials. Dave made that clarification for us. But there's a huge amount of game officials quitting across the high school sports, and he gave some examples about there are many venues where you're supposed to have 3 referees for a basketball game. They can only have 2. Some games were canceled because they don't have enough referees. I talked to Mike earlier this spring. Several baseball games couldn't be made up because there's not enough umpires. And when you have rainouts and they start stacking games on the same night, you gotta pass on that game, which is unfair for our kids. So one of the reasons that they're quitting is coming from the sidelines. It's coming from the parents, and that's part of the thing that we wanted to address. And then we found that there's this vast discrepancy between rules of engagement. It was kind of interesting. We did a straw poll of some current high school coaches, asked them the question of how do you like to have your engagement between your parents and your players and you? And what we found is there's vast differences between everybody's opinion on that, which can be confusing. It can be confusing for the athlete. It can be confusing for the parent. So we want to develop some awareness of consistency of that. So no matter what sport you're in, no matter what coach you're dealing with, there's going to be some rules of engagement to proceed. So what we're trying to do is, one, let parents know there's a problem, because some probably don't think there is, and educate them as to what the problems are, including some of the rates of quitting and the referee problems we have. And then what is healthy sport parenting? What does it mean to parent your child? What's it mean to interact with your coach? And what's it mean to interact with your other fellow parents and fans at a competition? Most of all, the thing that I'm going to present to you tonight is it's tying into all those themes is about message consistency. And I think that goes along with some of the conversations we had at the sports task force. You need to have a consistent message going across no matter where you're at, through sport parenting and through the continuum from youth athletics or youth sports into high school athletics. So the first deliverable that we want to present to you tonight deals with message consistency. One is recognition of it, and two is accessibility to it. Those are some things that we talked about as a group, and how is it best to give somebody a message? Is it a lot of documents? Is it going in and shuffling through a handbook of some sort? In the theme that we came up with is it's really easy to recognize a logo. You can recognize Nike logo across the world and you know what it is. You can recognize different logos and know what it is. And that goes along with the branding for Oregon and that One Oregon concept. I think if we incorporated the One Oregon logo into the next slide, and just have this theme, it's their game. It's not your game. It's not anyone else's game. It's their game. So this is just a brief mock-up. There's nothing official. It's a draft per se. We wanted to make sure we just got you to understand the concept of it. But if you can have this simple slogan and maybe a logo that goes with it, with the Oregon One branding, people recognize that and they understand what it means. We'll give them the supplemental information. We'll supplement that information through the team meetings they have, through youth sports coaches, so it all trickles down to the lowest levels. But everybody should understand what that means when they sit in the stands. The bullet point, you don't have to go back, Andy, but the last bullet point on the previous slide was, how do we get that out and how do we get that logo out? And that's where I think we're looking for you to kind of give us a nod of, this sounds reasonable because it's going to include some financial contribution to make some banners to have present at the games. It's going to have to be in the programs. We were thinking of things of having it on the outfield fence at a baseball game, or in the gym of competition, or out on the track in the football field, at the soccer pitch. So those are some ways you want to have that message always present in front of your fans and in front of your parents. And again, if it's a consistent message that goes from youth all the way up to high school, people get it. The next slide is just another crack at kind of a way to present that logo. Again, something simple, something that brands Oregon. Again, the final draft would incorporate that Oregon logo, so people understand what it is. Then we came up with a second idea. Obviously, one of the things that we want to do is make sure parents and fans understand that this is an educational process. So competition is an extension of the classroom. There's a way to kind of tie this in that we came up with an acronym, help them make the grade. It's just another option to think about as far as the branding and a logo goes. And if you advance to the next slide, Andy, the acronym can, again, be spelled out in different ways, but basically it's grow and learn with me. It's like the kid is talking to the parent, or the competitor is talking to the fan in the stands. Respect my decisions, my coaches, my game officials. Be accountable. The accountability starts with you, the parent. Don't say one thing and behave another way in the stands. And then the dedication of a parent to help that child. And then lastly, tying into the common theme that we found through the sports task force, changing the game series of the take home from that is, I love to watch you play. So enjoy watching me play. Don't get all revved up in it, but just enjoy watching me play. So we can all, probably say guilty as charged at some point to those points. I know I can. But this has been a great reflection as far as what we want to make sure that our fans, our parents, and our kids know as they come into the sporting community, whether it's youth sports, high school sports, it's always the same. The second deliverable that we wanted to talk about tonight was public awareness, and that's a little small, so I apologize. It's a brainstorming of ideas. Most of them are not at no cost, but basically looking at how do you attack this from a public awareness standpoint. And it's face-to-face interactions. Like I said before, we can, as a council, have agreed to be present and talk to the presidents of all of our youth sports clubs. Ties in nicely with the task force number 2, and that, or recommendation number 2, and that's where Mike Carr will sit down and talk to the presidents or the heads of each youth sports organization twice a year. So it's a way for us to interject ourselves into that crowd in that presentation and just make them aware, and then have them dedicate themselves to distributing that message across their coaches and across their parents as well. Can also, as I said before, be present at the fall, the winter, and the spring sports meetings here at the high school. We can be present for the youth sports meetings that they have initially when you're looking at any club, any baseball, soccer, softball, whatever it may be, and to have that face-to-face interaction. Then you look at social media, you look at the Oregon website, you look at email, you look at having something readable in a program. But again, always having it present, I think, is important, because in my experience, moving up from, second grade up through high school, you kind of have to feel it out. There's no real consistency in messaging that you get as a parent. I think you understand that there's certain things you don't want to do in public, but there's no one telling you, hey, these are our boundaries and this is our expectation as a school district and as a community for your behavior. And again, that second piece of here's how you help your child. That is kind of the overview. I didn't want to take up too much of your time, but moving forward, I just want to make sure that you guys understood where we're at. Look for any questions, any feedback you might have, because what we want to do now is move forward and try to get some of this implemented by the fall, especially with the education piece. We feel strongly in the logo, but again, that's something that I'd like to get some feedback on from you guys as well. So I'll open it up.
Any board members, any comments, questions?
Quick question. Tim, were you giving us an option in terms of the it's their game or the grade as the message, or are those two separate pieces of the same message?
Yeah, so I think we approached it as two separate messages, because one is strictly a pop-in. When you're at the event and you see it's their game, it kind of helps you with that behavior in the stands. But the make the grade is tying in the educational piece to it. And I think that's consistent with what we were discussing in our meetings. So I think we believe strongly in both of them because they attack two different things.
I really like it. I mean, I like everything about what I heard tonight. I think I've said this before, but I ran youth baseball for 12 years, and I was a game official, and I no longer do either. Mm-hmm. And I just frankly got tired of fighting the culture in both capacities, and I think it is a cultural thing that has to happen, because one of the things that's really a struggle in youth sports is educating new parents every year that come into it that have a different philosophy with it. It's even those parents who are in the organization, those who are strong-willed and have the ability by either time or money to dedicate to that, can take over a team or a sport and a philosophy if you don't have a solid culture in place to play on that, and that takes time. And all of this work, and with your work as a group, plays into fighting that. And it's a really great step. I really like the second one. I like the grade, but I like that one a lot. Mm-hmm. I mean, that one rings to me a lot. So I really like that. The message that we heard last time, it's telling parents to enjoy themselves when they watch the game. Mm-hmm. I learned that with daughter number 2. So daughter number 3 was much more fun to watch through. And you could tell the parents of daughter or son number 1 that are going through very clearly, because the Wizard veterans figured out it, it doesn't make a whole lot of difference in their long-term development on what they're doing in fourth grade soccer. So, and that was the theme that we tried to get out, was that you can be competitive at the highest level and still be educational and have the right philosophy if you do that. And so I really applaud you for putting the time in. I think the message is right based upon my experience and the way you're approaching it. It's exactly right in my view. With it, the one thing that I think a next step is, while you guys are developing that culture, I mean, there's some hard issues that have to be talked about with the youth sports organization, and that is, at what level do you segregate by ability, and how do you do that? When and to what extent is travel appropriate? And at what point in time do we start saying narrowing the game from 3 sports to 2 sports to 1 sport is appropriate? When is specialization appropriate? To me, those are the 3 questions. And I think over the last 20 years, we've gone to more specialization earlier and more travel earlier. And that was counter with where we wanted to head after we had convened the first task force. I think we've drifted, but there are a lot more cultural trends that enhance that in the world. The club sport phenomena, the for-profit organizations that have accessibility to really good coaches and parents willing to pay that, have taken away the ability of districts to monitor what's going on in sports because we have the facilities that those groups have to use. That's no longer true anymore. So it's great that we have the message, but you got to get the sports organizations on board with that in terms of the broader philosophy, I think, too. Thank you.
Agreed.
I think that's the role of recommendation number 2, that there's got to be alignment, as Tim talked about. Our athletic director and our athletic programs and the leadership of these sports have got to come together and start identifying those best practices and what is their role. And also understand that the parent group is a needle that we can move. So those are the 2 pieces that we don't spend a lot of time talking about.
And one of the other things I didn't expand upon a whole lot was, we're also looking at the sustainability piece of this to move forward, because that's going to be the important part. So you don't have a flash in the pan, and all of a sudden you have this wow factor, and then it's gone. So we're kind of working on trying to come up with a sustainment plan and see how that moves forward.
That's exactly right. You can get the right people on for 2 or 3 years, and then they move on, and then you backslide with it.
Yeah, I think this is just fantastic, and your message is, I mean, I'm just sitting here thinking how ironic or something it is that we have to be educating our parents in such a direct way. But I love this. I love the directness of your message, and the idea that it'll be in front of parents in a lot of ways and in a lot of spaces, I think is great.
So one of the things I heard this group say, put before us, was potentially there is some money needed to make this happen, both for the branding and then for signage, banners, etc. So how do we navigate that, and where does that come from, and how do we get that ball rolling? Because I think what I'm hearing you say is we need to do this now if you want to be implementing some of this by fall.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, we can do the non-cost things. Coming up with a logo and getting it out on websites and doing those things. I just think it's more powerful if it's in front of you at the game as well, and I think that's where it needs to take that important step. So that'd be actually a question that we all had: is where is it funded from, and who would that drop through?
I mean, I would see this really as a partnership between the youth sports organizations along with the school sports organizations, meaning if we can get youth sports tied in with this concept and we can agree the One Oregon concept makes sense, and this reminder of it's their game, there's the educational piece, which can be relatively low cost, right? You can incorporate it into your codes of conduct for your parents and your students, and you can have it at the meetings, and you can talk about the value of, let's remind ourselves of these things. But to get that image in front of people's faces, I agree, is so important and would be very critical to continue to remind people of that overarching goal. And so I guess my comment would be if this could be a partnership between each of those youth sports, pooling money and from their fees and finding value in this and finding that, you know, we can sponsor a banner for the 3 fields that, you know, my kids both play soccer. Well, we can do this at their soccer, or my daughter dances at a leap above. We could put this, I mean, dance may not be quite the same as a soccer game as far as parent participation.
Tim, why don't you work with Mike Carr in terms of any budget items that you have, and then we can work with the administrative team to get the approval for that through the board.
Can I make a suggestion that Erica is part of that meeting as well, if that's amenable to Brian, in terms of marketing and communication, and potentially having a proposal come in terms of what a cost would be, that then there can be an approach of what would be best, partnership or whatever.
Yep.
But that's really in her.
I think if we can develop a platform, you know, those marketing materials and things like that, and people can subscribe into the platform, I think that's where the district can bring its best value, is creating that platform and then making that platform accessible to the youth sports.
Right, and I think it gives some credibility and power to your message, that you have the backing of the district on that.
I have another question. This is probably for Dr. Bussler. Do we know when we're going to see those survey results from Mr. Carr?
We were planning sometime this summer, but we have not queued it up for an agenda item yet. So either, well, we have 2 meetings in July, so either the 8th or the 15th, or after that it would be August 19th. Do you have a preference? It's okay to suggest.
Sooner rather than later.
Okay.
Sure.
Also need a report about the consortium, because that was part of that, those 2 were supposed to be.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think earlier in the summer is better because that gives us the rest of the summer to make any other plans or implement things that we need to implement for the school year, because I think that's the idea. So, and I know the survey was done like in February, I want to say. So, yeah. Thanks.
Anything else from the board? Krista?
Does the board need to, or would it be helpful for the board to approve this plan, or, I mean, because the Parent Advisory Council was just, when it came to visioning, it was a concept that they were going to come to us and we would say, yes, we endorse that, move forward. So I don't know if it's helpful or if it's needed, that the board.
Seems like we have a consensus that the message and the path is the right way right now, and I think the formal approval would come when we allocate the funds for it. I think that would be a more public way to do that, would be, but I think you're hearing tonight that this is thumbs up from us.
So just so we're on the same page, what I'll do is we'll come up with a finalized logo. I'll work with Krista, because I know you had some experience with the marketing and the building of the website.
And Erica.
And Erica. Hi, Erica. So I want to make sure you all see that before we start moving forward, and then we can start talking about. I'll talk to Mike and come up with a plan and get you a ballpark number about what that would be for putting something on our fields, competition areas.
I don't think you'll see the board micromanaging your logo, so if you work with Erica and Krista and your group to come up with one.
Okay.
And that will include the One Oregon concept.
Yep.
Yeah. Great. On behalf of the board, thank you for all the time you've put in on this, and for coming here tonight to report on that. As I think you've heard, we're really enthusiastic about it, and it's a really important aspect of the district's functions. So many of our kids are engaged in co-curriculars at the youth sports level or in high school, that we need to make sure that we get the philosophy and the messaging right. So thanks.
Thank you. Thanks for having us. Thank you.
All right, item E2 on the agenda is the 2019-2020 CISA 2 service contract, and this is for audiology, I think. Is that right? That's our standard annual contract for that?
It is for audiology and general CISA services. Nothing really has changed in the general contract or the CISA or the audiology services.
Gina, have you reviewed this and are we okay contractually?
I have, and yes, we are.
Okay. Any questions from the board? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve the CISA 2 contract for the 2019-2020 school year.
I'll move approval.
Ms. Oderico with the motion. Is there a second? Second. Ms. Flanagan, any further discussion? Since this is a contract, would you call the roll?
Ms. Oderico? Yes. Ms. Flanagan?
Yes.
Ms. Feeney?
Yes.
Ms. Bijak?
Yes.
Mr. LeBrun?
Yes.
Mr. Zach?
Yes. Motion carries. Action item E3 is potential increases in open enrollment spaces. Brian.
Board members, you'll recall that we come back in the month of June if we're making any recommendations for changes in open enrollment spaces. And we have done our review and we are making a recommendation for 10 additional spaces at the 4K level. And our recommendation is to approve these. As requested, it's 4K only on current enrollments. We have looked forward to see those 4K because remember, once students start with us, they tend to stay with us. And we feel by the time the new school will be opened, we're going to have a capacity at the elementary schools as we move students from Netherwood, possibly, or not possibly, Prairie View, and possibly Brooklyn and RCI to the new school. So we'll have some flexibility. We believe we can accommodate these 10 students. In terms of what does those 10 students mean on the other side, that would give us the opportunity to hire another teacher. And again, the beauty here is if we have extra student or additional students, we will be able to invest in an additional classroom, and we seldom run classrooms of 10, so we will be able to offset those additional seats with Oregon students and make for a stronger program for ourselves. So that's what we talked about as a committee. Gina, anything you'd like to add to that?
Any questions from any board member? Courtney.
So we're not adding capacity, we're not adding another site of 4K with this, we're just...
That's correct.
Okay.
And that's a great question, Courtney. Sometimes when if we were adding 30 students in first grade, we would need to hire an additional teacher. Here, the 4K sites have capacity. It's just going to generate capacity for us in the future, or budget revenue in the future.
So when we're talking about 4K kids, do we have a list of people who are trying to get into those 10 spots, and how do we sift through that list?
Yes, in terms of open enrollment, you can only apply from another Wisconsin public school if your community offers 4K. It's a little different than kindergarten through 12th grade. So we have to go through our list of applicants. They've already applied. Katie might know off the top of her head how many there are. Yeah, because we have a wait list. Oh, Gina has it.
There are 9 on the wait list, and then we have another family that has a sibling that did not apply, that has a 4K. So that's why we're asking for 10, because they can apply through the alternative procedure. So everyone on the list who does not need special education programming would be admitted if they chose to come here, if the board approved this. Unfortunately, we do not have space in any of our programs in special education. So if there would be a denial, it would be because of that.
And you probably recall, although we only do this once a year, some families will apply to multiple school districts. So we're not guaranteed that 9 would show up. We also, with folks moving over the summer, we could get additional requests, and we would go up to that 10, the capacity of 10 additional seats.
And again, if we have applicants from outside, from McFarland, for instance, what's our responsibility in terms of transportation?
really no transportation unless the family were to go to one of our pre-existing bus routes.
My only concern initially was that, just given the fact that we're building a school and we had recognized the pinch area at K-8 area with that, but we've built capacity in over a period of time and growing into our capacity with the new building, and by the time these folks funnel through, that capacity, if we have any ceiling hit, they'll be at the back end of it, so that's not going to impact us at all. So I'm comfortable with that at the 4K right now. Okay, I need a motion if there are no further questions.
I move that we will approve the proposal for additional open enrollment spaces.
Yep, it's for 10 additional open enrollment spaces in 4K for the 2019-2020 school year. Okay.
Second.
Any further discussion? We'll need to call the roll on this.
Ms. Feeney?
Yes.
Mr. LeBrun?
Yes.
Ms. Oderico?
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan?
Yes.
Ms. Bijak?
Yes.
Mr. Zach?
Yes, motion carries, so we can notify those families. Item F, I think we can change our agenda in the future. No, we can do that. I missed that, Katie. Yeah, informational items, leading educator report. Is that you, Leslie? Come on up.
And I assure you, oh, let me grab my notes just 1 minute. Even though the presentation says April 9th, I know it's not April 9th, I promise you. I just wanted to bring you back to what we discussed for a moment in April. I'll go through those 5 slides or so very quickly. So Andy is my slide person tonight. Thank you, Andy. We started off in April talking about the fact that our leading educators' work was highly connected, of course, to everything that we do and everything we are about. And then, thank you, the fact that their role has been to partner with our educators in providing personalized, responsive classrooms and school environments, and then also to support the multiple types of professional learning that we offer related to our compensation system and the pathways. And then Erica created a very easy to read graphic that showed you how we distributed the leading educators funds basically, because we looked at the idea that we had a certain amount of FTE to distribute according to a strategic plan to support the highest quality learning for our students and for our staff. And that our area of focus would be instructional coaches and social emotional coaches. And over the course, we're going to go back to that one. And then to add on some additional assistance related to math coordination and ELA coordination through grade 8. And that's because these positions are half-time. And we also had department chairs at the high school level that could help lead some of the work. There's been some really good partnerships happening there. And then we had an unfilled position of a 0.5 ESL coaching coordinator. And I'll talk you through how we've worked that out. And then finally, the idea that for the leading educators, it would always be a plan, do, study, act, a continuous cycle. Have we made the right decisions, and how do we know? Because how we utilize our resources tells us a lot about who we are. And then, if you want to move 2 forward, please, Andy. Thank you. The next one, too. Things that we learned. So part of what we learned, I think that was really important, is that we felt like we were on the right path, that we were doing the things that we needed to do to make an impact on the learning of our students, because as we've all heard many times from many different sources, but most particularly Jim Rickabaugh, if it doesn't have an impact on the students' learning, why are you doing it? And so we also knew that we also re-examined this idea of a 0.5 ESL coach and coordinator. We really needed the coordinator FTE because there are a lot of duties associated with the organization and the running of an ESL program. And one of our ESL teachers, Katie Hadu, had been doing that as a part of her contract, a 0.2 portion of her contract for a very long time. However, the number of students she's serving at the elementary level, because she's working at both Prairie View and Brooklyn, has continued to climb. So she really felt strongly that she would be better to serve the students if she was 1.0 as the teacher, and the coordinator piece could move somewhere else. So we have saved that little 0.2 in allocation, and we believe that when we open up the new school, there'll be a redistribution of bilingual and ESL servicing and programming, and that we probably will have some additional hiring related to that. Consequently, we will be in the year 2020 folding that 0.2 coordination into what we expect will be additional ESL and bilingual allocation for our future. But until then, we are investigating a wonderful 0.2 alternative for the next year. But that's for another night. Because now I will talk to you a little bit about the follow-up to Leading Educator, because last time I was with you, I told you we would have some data. So if we'll move to the next screen, thank you, and the next, there we go. So first I'll talk about the social emotional learning coaches, because that is those are the two positions that I think a lot of people wondered, how exactly are you going to measure the impact of that? And I admit that we talked about that a little bit too. How exactly are we going to do that? So if you remember, we had a 0.5 for Michelle Kretschmann, our SEL coach for K4. So she was a special education teacher at RCI for part of the day, and a SEL coach for 3 buildings the other part of the day. And you'll see, and I will show you the results in a minute, things went really well. And we had another SEL coach, Janet Pliner, who was 1.0, which is great, but she was split over 3 schools and really served a lot of teachers between that split. So we made a little change. We worked together to come up with a different way of doing this. Because we were making quite a bit of headway at the elementaries, and I'll show you how we know that in a little while, and we knew that we wanted to do more. We really wanted to make Michelle's role a full-time role also. And at the same time, in lots of discussions, Janet and I talked about the fact that she'd really prefer to be 2 schools and maybe reduce her contract. And so with all these discussions, we came out with a 0.8 SEL coach for middle school and high school and a 1.0 SEL for K6. And we think this will be a really good distribution of the work, and it follows with what we are seeing, and I'll talk to you about that in a minute. Also important to note, we talked about this before with our mental health update, but we've allocated almost $850,000 toward mental health in the last several years because we know what a priority it is for our students. However, these positions, the SEL coaches, are the only ones that are solely assigned to proactivity and developing a set of universal experiences in social emotional learning for our children. So their role is very different from that of a counselor or a social worker or anything like that. They are about creating universal experiences that embed social emotional learning into the classroom. So knowing that that was where we wanted the positions to go, we decided as a team that our first year we really wanted to spend the time on raising the awareness of the staff regarding social emotional learning and what it meant to include it into their classroom on a daily basis. So we went back and looked at some work of Drew Howick. I'm sure a lot of you remember Drew from different times he has facilitated, but he has this diagram called the pyramid of engagement. Starts off at the very lowest level, it's just, yeah, I know what that is. To the very top level, I know what it is, I know what my role is, and I know how to do it well. And we said, why don't we look at social emotional learning and the pyramid of engagement and our staff this year and try to move them up that pyramid of engagement for year 1. After that, we'll move into measuring our impact on kids. But first, we have to know that teachers feel confident with what they're doing. So, if you go to the next one, we did some surveying, beginning of the year to end of the year. So, at RCI, at the beginning of the year, 11% of the staff said that they felt they knew how to teach social emotional learning successfully throughout their day. By the end of the year, that grew to 64%. So that was a good amount of growth we felt in 1 year. And the other side of it was at the beginning of the year, 23% of the teachers responded, yes, I know what it is, but that's all I really know. So that was 23% in the beginning of the year and 0 at the end because they had all moved up. So we felt that was a really good beginning. And another thing with our leading educators, so we asked them to have their SLOs really tightly connected to this kind of work. So in this particular school, the goal was, this was Janet Pliner's goal working with them, was that 100% of the 5th and 6th grade teachers who completed the survey would be able to identify 3 social emotional skills or strategies they've incorporated into their practice. And then also how they've seen the learners demonstrate those skills. And she met that goal. Through the end of the year survey, teachers were able to do that. And that might not seem like a lot, but it's a lot. We really increased awareness for people to understand what it means, how to do it, and how to see that the kids are actually using it. So if we look at the middle school and RCI, the tool for social emotional learning in both cases was really the second step curriculum. And at the middle school, we went from 4% saying they could teach it successfully throughout the day to 26%. And we went from 16% of I've heard of social emotional learning down to 7%. And there were lots of teachers who were in the middle, which was, I know what it is, I know what I can do, they just don't necessarily have the confidence to do it yet, or to do it as well as they can yet. Now I want to show you Netherwood, the next slide. I remember we spoke last week, and I had said that Michelle Kretschmann had done several learning sessions with the Netherwood staff, sometimes as much as 2 a month over the course of the year. And this, from I teach SEL successfully throughout the day, went from 11% to 88%. That's a significant jump. And I think we can say that probably comes from the amount of professional learning time that was devoted to understanding the social emotional learning standards themselves, and then specific strategies that are associated with those standards. And then I've heard of SEL, but that's about it, went from 30% to 0. And the really good news is that all of our elementaries are experiencing a similar level of success. For instance, if we go to Brooklyn, you'll see I teach it successfully throughout the day, went from 9 to 76. And I heard of it, went from 33 to 0. Once again, staff meetings devoted to learning and understanding the standards, and then the specific program zones of regulation. And then Prairie View, 7% from I teach it successfully throughout the day to 76. And 35%, I heard of it, to 0. So the social emotional coaches this year felt that they made really strong headway, and that the headway was really tightly tied to professional learning and the opportunities they had to work directly with the staff. And it wasn't just staff meetings where the learning took place. There were also after-school learning sessions, there were book studies, there was a significant amount of ongoing opportunities for people to learn how to do this. And then Michelle Kretschmann was also, she will be this summer, a presenter at the Children's Success Foundation Global Summit. She applied because she is also a Nurtured Heart trainer and now a social emotional coach. And so she is presenting in New Jersey this summer at this global summit related to the work that she's doing here. And I thought you might find it interesting, so I'll read to you the description of her, her sort of the bio that they put out next to her session. Michelle is a mother and has worked as a special education teacher focusing on emotional behavioral disorders for over 20 years. She is employed as a social emotional learning coach for PK4 in her school district because she also worked with the 4K sites this year, and they have introduced zones of regulation, which is the same emotional identification program that we're using at the elementaries. Her emphasis is on increasing her district's internal capacity as educators to meet the academic and social emotional needs of learners through partnering with educators in creating personalized, responsive classroom and school environments, as well as facilitating professional learning opportunities in alignment with instructional vision, data-determined needs, and the district values. Michelle is an advanced trainer for the Nurtured Heart approach, a member of her district's Equity Committee and Positive Behavior Intervention and Supports team, and sits on the district's Mental Health Task Force. So I think the fact that large organizations that are bringing in global speakers are very interested in what it is we're trying to accomplish in our district is yet another good sign that we're on a good path here. And then for our instructional coaches, we have, I asked all of them to have SLOs, or the ones specifically associated with leading educator positions also, to have SLOs related to something that I could share out as far as productivity or things that we have improved or increased. So I don't want to be too specific because some of the, the things that they work on, there's a layer of confidentiality related to it. However, we saw a measured increase in mathematical discourse in special education classrooms. The video you saw from the English 12 PLC was connected to wonderful work for all of the people involved. But that particular accomplishment, and I think it's a huge accomplishment, was associated with one of our coaches, and it was his SLO actually that was part of moving that whole work forward, and is now leading into that English 9 PLC. So things are just really starting to roll. We just have great teachers. I have to say that any chance I get. We've also had them involved in, a data-driven pilot and adoption and implementation of a new K2 phonics program, and also a 5-8 word study program. So we've also had the increase in participation in the authentic intellectual work at the high school. We have 41 teachers in 2 weeks, next week actually, who are in this room for a summit called Every Teacher a Leader. That is exciting, and that came directly from the work of the coaches in partnership with all of our other teachers. I never want to forget them when talking about these things. And then also all of our coaches, instructional as well as social emotional, are working together to offer the Compassion Resilience Toolkit at all of our schools. Because we also know that if we're not taking care of the social emotional component for our staff, it makes it much more difficult to make sure we're doing it for our students too. This summer we have a book study called Becoming the Math Teacher You Wish You Had. I think that's kind of exciting, and there's already 25 people signed up for that. And we are sending 3 separate cohorts to Teachers College at Columbia University. One to study the K2 phonics implementation, and the other 2 to look specifically at issues of equity and inclusivity related to our English language arts curriculum. And all of those pieces are spearheaded by the instructional coaches. And then one more piece, Andy, if you want to move on. The coordinators, I mentioned them, and I mentioned that because of them, we're doing things they wouldn't be able to do otherwise. This is an example. We have wanted for a very long time to create a math progression or continuum of skills so that teachers could sit down next to students and really identify where they were at on a continuum of learning and confer with them and help them move to the next step, much like what you saw for the English 12 PLC. However, when consulting with area experts, it was very difficult because A, this hasn't really been done, and B, when it's been done, it was often a series of all the standards were laid out, and that was called the continuum, or it was a series of mathematical procedures laid out for kids to master, and that was not at all what we were interested in. We're interested in the development of mathematical thinking, flexibility of strategies, and we're interested in how to put that together in a way that makes sense. And our experts have been wonderful to us, but they've also been a little bit like good luck because mathematical thinking does not follow a linear progression. Consequently, the development of a linear continuum is sort of pie in the sky because that's not how kids' minds work. So our K-8 math coordinators, Celia Paswa, in addition to our other two excellent math coaches, have been working for a little over about 2 years, I suppose, with teachers, a series of professional learning experiences with a team of teachers to develop a knowledge set deep enough so that they can take a look at every standard and break it down into introductory, developing, and mastery sets of behavior. What that looks like, what it would look like to be beyond that standard in your thinking. Not just in what you can memorize and do, but in your mathematical thinking. And they're developing this for every standard and every grade as a teacher tool in helping to understand where students are in their thinking and where to help push them next. And eventually, we want to make it friendly enough so that it becomes a student tool so students can do their own evaluation of where they are in their thinking and where they want to push to next. So this is an example of the type of project that can get accomplished because we have people who 0.5 of their FTE is devoted to pushing forward thinking like this. So that's where we are right now. Really, really good news and good measurable outcomes coming from the SEL coaches and significant opportunities for our teachers related to learning that will impact our students from a lot of the other decisions made with these funds.
Thank you, Leslie. Board, any questions or comments for Leslie? Barb?
I'm just so blown away. Super impressive.
Tim?
Oh my
Anything?
God.
Krista? We're good?
I just wonder about the last concept, the last slide you
yeah.
showed, and does that have legs in the capstone conversation or things in terms of, where is a student at? What's mastery look like? It's a really interesting concept.
Yeah, it might. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Leslie. Great report. It's good to see we're making great progress with respect to, our leaders.
Yeah, we have great people.
Good. Okay, G2, Superintendent's Report. Brian.
I have 5 quick items. Number 1, last day of school, Thursday, June 13th. And I know everyone is working right to the end. But our students are ready for summer. And I'm guessing some adults are ready for summer too. We will finish strong this week with 3 more days of school. Yesterday, graduation. This was the largest group of students we have had graduate indoors, not outdoors. Outdoors, we had a group that was almost 350, and I believe that was 2009. But yesterday's graduation could not have gone any better. We sent off a wonderful group of young people into the world, and based on the speeches and comments I heard from several parents and students afterwards, it was just a delightful day. So if you'd like to see it again, you can, WOW has it on their channel. Andy knows how to do that or get that up, and I think it's probably on YouTube.
It is YouTube. It's a Oregon Community Access channel, so it's OCAmedia on YouTube, and you can get to it.
And Mr. Planner completed it in almost record time. Less than an hour and 15 minutes, and we're not trying to set a record on time. We're just trying to set a record on efficiency. We are getting prepared. Eric and I have been working on the all-parent end of the school year email, which will be a summary of some information contained in our all-community newsletter, which we've signed off on the proof. It's gone to print and will be in mailboxes plus or minus at the end of June. So this was an idea that came from one of our board work sessions when we spoke about messaging and how to bring together all the items that we're working on in terms of school construction, boundary related issues, transportation, which we're setting off for a little bit, but keeping our community well informed in terms of our plans for the future. And the last time we went through a referendum, the 2014 referendum, we sent out 3 or 4 construction updates on a periodic basis. And the feedback that we received from the community, both parents that have children in school and families that had connections to school in the past, but right now don't have anyone in school, was very positive. So we're going to continue that investment through September of 2020. And then summer school. I know we're not finished with school. I shouldn't be talking about summer school already, but we have our summer school schedule planned, and classes will start on Monday, July 8th. We're doing it a little differently. We've delayed summer school a bit over the last 2 years, and I believe last year we went the week of 4th of July, but that seems to be a really popular week for our families to be out, so we're making another little tweak to it. And if you get any feedback on summer school, some of the things that I hear are, oh my goodness, the classes fill up so fast. We've tried to take an equity-based approach with that as well, and knowing that not everyone has the same level of high-speed internet access. So we've made some adjustments with that, and we will continue to tweak that over the years. So those are the 5 big items. There's more items than that. I'm just narrowing the search a little bit for tonight. So happy to answer any questions that you have.
Anything? Okay. Anything on future agenda? I know you and I have been working on that. Do we have that ready tonight or not?
I do not, but
Okay.
the one item I do have ready, I know Mike was not able to be at the meeting, but he sent me a text, and his response was he is ready for the July 8th meeting. So
Okay.
you can anticipate that being on the agenda.
And watch in your in-betweener, because we'll have the agenda, the year out kind of agenda, because Brian and I have been working on that. Okay, cool. All right, checkout. Courtney.
I just wanted to give a kudos to Erica for arranging a wonderful groundbreaking ceremony last Thursday at the site of our new school building. That was really exciting. I know most of you were there. That was really fun to see the progress and to see all the students so excited about the future of that project as well. So thanks, Erica. Good job.
Thank you. Anna, anything?
No, I do have just a question, because I've been seeing some invitations for equity sessions through WASB, like July 12th and 13th, but I know there's a Dane County equity session that is being hosted in September, and I'm just trying to wrap my head around what should I be paying attention to on that. I mean, as far as I'm interested in it, and so I'm trying to find out if I should go to one or both. I mean, yeah, that's what I'm asking. Does anyone have any input on that? Has anyone attended those? What's the consent?
Sure, I can make a couple of quick copies or comments. The WASB runs a series of professional development activities throughout the year, and that is one of their fundraisers.
Okay.
So since you are now an official Wisconsin school board member, you will get a lot of those. But if you find one that's interesting to you, all you need to do is give Katie a call, and Katie will take care of getting your registration set.
Okay.
I would say that's probably a more extensive training. I haven't looked at it specifically, but I
Sure.
think it's a day and a half, if I have it right.
It's July 12th and 13th. I
Yes.
think it's 2 days.
The one that's coming up in September, that's what the Dane County Superintendents and the Dane County Equity Group have put together.
Okay.
That's going to be at Monona Grove. There's no cost to it. And the goal is we're trying to make an equity movement throughout the county and be consistent, knowing that school districts are at very different places, where we've been working with National Equity Committee for 3 going on 4 years. Some districts have been working with them 5, 6 years, and there's other districts that don't even know who the National Equity Group is. So
Okay.
there's a lot of wide variety, but you'll be able to connect and learn with other Dane County board members, which
Great.
I think there's a huge, huge advantage to that, because we all live in the same neck of the woods, so to speak.
Perfect. Thank you.
Barb, anything? Tim?
I just want, again, kudos to all the orchestration in graduation yesterday. I just think it went very, very well. Just for improvement, I think we talked a little bit about it last year, just having some feedback speakers or something so that the folks who are sitting up front can hear. It's very difficult to hear from where we're sitting. At least it was for me, just from all the echoing that's going on. And to be able to see the speakers, I think, would be helpful. Because we just see. Yeah. But it was a fantastic graduation. It really was.
Krista?
Just one thing. Thank you for letting me be the lead on handing out diplomas. That was very special. But I do want to make one other special note, and maybe you all didn't see it because you weren't up front like I was, but the amount of kids that gave Jim Pliner a hug was amazing. And I actually had parents remark on that. One was Beckon's dad, how special it was for kids to initiate a hug with their high school principal. So kudos, Jim.
Yeah, that was pretty evident that, Jim, you're a relationship principal with those folks, and they have a strong tie to you. And again, thank you to you and Brad and Kim and Mike. That's not an easy event to pull off that well, and that was really pulled off well. It was terrific. Your speech was great. I really enjoyed the 1919 references too. So the other thing about, and I thought the student speeches were really good too. Yeah, a little monitor speaker facing us, because it is hard for us to hear out there a little bit.
We realized as we were setting up, because there's no bleachers on that side, the speakers are all pointed.
Yeah.
into the stand.
Yeah. So, but it was terrific. Brian, great speech. My takeaway from that was just your comment about kindness. And the words that you had about that rang really true. And I gave some thought to maybe we ought to have that as a district motto for next year, that we all model kindness to each other and buck the national trend. I saw the kids nodding their head when you said that. That really resonated well. So, girls' soccer team is going to state. They play Thursday night at 7 o'clock. So 5th straight year of their appearance at state. So that's really exciting for them. I was at the game on Saturday night, and that was really exciting, emotional game. So they were really excited. So congratulations to them. State tournaments over in Milwaukee. Lastly, Beckon, congratulations to you. Usually we say you can, at the last meeting of the year, you're excused from coming to these. You certainly can come to us in July. I'm probably going to call you and have you come at the beginning of one, because maybe we'll give you a little gift for appreciation from having us here. Yeah, I got to turn
Which
my...
button to press? There we go. I'm actually working, you have to let me know which day. I'm working in Iowa all summer, and I leave in like 2 days. So I can come back, if there's this.
Or in August, we'll connect up.
Yeah, so just let me know.
I usually am better than this and have it ready for this meeting, but I dropped the ball on it. So we want to see it one more time.
So it's okay.
Yeah. we've really enjoyed your presence here, and I hope you've learned a lot from what we do or what we don't do.
Yeah, I really, really appreciate the opportunity that you guys have given me, so thank you so much.
All right, so we're going to recess for a minute. The board's we're going to go over to the room over there for a closed session. We're not going to be returning to open session. We'll adjourn out of closed session. So thanks, everyone. We're done in here for tonight.
Just in case. Yeah, in case somebody locks this.